Hello, good morning, let me see, that was the wrong button. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another TAUS webinar. My name is Annemai van der Meer. I'm the events director at TAUS, and I have a really great panel with me today. Let me introduce them to you first. We have John Jonker, who's the co-founder of Byte Level Research, one of the world's experts in web globalization. John is a frequent speaker at industry events. You may also remember him from last year's TAUS virtual conference, and a publisher and contributor to many different publications and media. We have Anna Golubeva from Inter-IKEA Systems. She has over 15 years experience in this industry from various angles. And then we have Eric Vogt, who is now at TAUS International, Lionbridge AI, and has been active in this industry since 1998. And of course, we have Jaap van der Meer, our very own TAUS director, with us today. So let me go back to the agenda, because the title of this webinar is 1 year later. Well, 1 year later, you might ask, what are you talking about? Well, last year in June, we of course had our virtual conference, and in that conference we did a lot of brainstorming on the translation industry in the summer of 2021. Of course, we were a few months into the coronavirus impact on our everyday life, our working situations, our personal situations. You know, we were working from home, a lot of things changed. And so in that conference, we brainstormed on the outcome. You know, will we reinvent ourselves? Will there be a reshuffle, a recession, or a redux? So now we are in the summer of 2021, and it's time to look at what happened. So what has changed? How has it impacted our industry? And of course, we'll also be looking a bit forward. Where are we now? But what should we be working on now? What's on our minds? And if time permits, we'd love to do some questions and answers at the end. But there's a lot of information to go through today. So let's start. Yeah, I'll give the floor to you.
Yeah, it's what a year has it been, indeed. I remember we were supposed to go to San Jose in March 2020 and meet some of you, or hopefully, all of you in person there at the massively multilingual conference. That's how we renamed our conference. I think we canceled it just 3-4 weeks before it was going to happen, and I remember we were the first because there was a series of conferences. It was the hardest decision maybe in the years at TAUS, but then others, Gala, AMTA, and so on, and Lockworld, they had to cancel their live events as well. The Olympic Games were cancelled, were postponed. UEFA, European Championship, it's happening now, but it had to be postponed. The NBA stopped playing their games. It was incredible. The world stopped turning around, it looked like it. So yeah, then we had our virtual conference in June, but before that conference, we asked everybody to make predictions, and we'll have them on the screen in a moment. Oh, there they are. Kind of based on this scenario-based planning management technique, like, if this happens, then, what is the outcome? So we broke it down in these 4 scenarios: the reshuffle, the reinvention, the redux, and the recession. And in a moment, we'll look at how the audience voted, where they expected this to go. And we also will do a poll, and in a moment, and we're going to ask all of you attending the webinar today, now looking back, what do you think? Was it indeed a reinvention, or was it a recession? Was it a redux? Oh, there we go. We'll do it right now. That's a good idea, Annemai. Yeah. How does it work?
Well, you can keep talking, Jaap, if you like, right. And the audience can keep voting.
We invite you to click one of them, and then we'll compare the outcome today, now that you have all the luxury of looking back on this year, to how you expected this year to become a year ago. So before we dive into these predictions and look at your new votes today, I'd like to ask our panel, how they felt this year turned out. How do you get through this year? How was it? John, why don't you start? Working from home as always, I guess.
Yes, well, I do work from home anyway, so from that element, it was largely the same, but it has definitely been a more monastic existence. We adopted another cat who may make an appearance, but I've actually been quite busy, with the notable exception of the travel industry, which certainly went into survival mode. But what I will say is one thing we did see over the past year is just how critical global websites are. For many companies, they became the only. They went from having a physical front door and a digital front door to a digital only front door. So it's actually been kind of an affirming year for those of us in this field to see just how valuable we were to keeping the lights on within so many companies.
Yeah. And for you, Anna, big changes this year or not so bad? How did you survive?
Well, yeah, it's been definitely a year to remember, and it's been very going from one extreme to another, and a lot of uncertainties, a lot of moving targets. I think with a lot of expectation, hopes. But I think, for if I think about IKEA, of course, it's been a difficult year, and as John mentioned, yes, website or e-commerce became even more important than it was for us before, and we were trying to really put a lot of effort into because, indeed, at some points in the year, it became our only channel how we can interact with people, with customers, but on the other hand, it's been also an interesting and quite good year, since IKEA, of course, is a company producing home furnishing solutions for life, focusing on life at home. So of course we know our kitchens turned into playgrounds, our bedrooms turned into studies and working spaces. So there has been a lot of creativity around, and also people needed to actually refurnish their homes. They had more time, more space to do that. So I think it was, in that sense, it was quite an interesting year, and with some also quite historical moments, like, for example, we stopped with a catalog production, with a printed catalog production it's been around for 70 years. So yeah, it's definitely been a significant change for us.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get back to that probably when we look at some of the main themes in this, that kind of took our business into new realms. Yeah, Eric, for you personally, it's been a big change. You've seen the consolidation wave. You've changed your position in the industry. How was the year, if you look back now?
Well, I'd probably define it in 3 chapters. Chapter 1. Uncertainty, where we're suddenly realizing that something big is happening, but we don't know how big or how long. Lots of chaos. Trying to move all employees home turned out a lot easier than we thought. Uncertainty about our client spends and what that meant for our business. Very, very surprising. Some things were big new spends in areas where clients were investing in areas that were new and adapting themselves, and others where there was a sudden drop. Probably because our customers are also going through that first chapter and thinking, what do we do? How much cash do we have in pocket? How much defensiveness do we need versus offense? And I'd say chapter 2 was adaptation, where I changed I wasn't traveling anymore, so suddenly now I had to find something else to do. So I started renovating a cabin up in the mountains and spend my weekends up there rather than at DIA Airport, which I thought was great. And that you can decide whether or not I picked the right color back here. I'll leave that to a poll for a later session. But then the third chapter is really, okay, re-ramping. Like we're now kind of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. What's the route now moving forward? And I know that this is very uneven. A lot of industries are sort of picking back up again. But it's certain areas of the world are very different than others. Industries are different than others in terms of their responses. So right now I'm in my re-ramp period, kind of starting a new chapter of my career, doing some fascinating work with data needed for AI services. Very, very interesting to see the intersection between the traditional localization and the AI cluster of different service types, but ultimately it boils down to kind of transformation. So yeah, in a nutshell, 3 chapters.
Yeah, great. And for you, Annemai, no more events?
Yeah,
big change working from home?
For me, it was a very big change. Of course, I've been at TAUS for a very long time and slowly rolled into the whole events part of the company. And then in 2019, I was flying really all over the world. I think we had 15 events in those 12 months. So going from that to suddenly no events at all was a big change. I haven't left my house for 15 months now. I mean, I've left my house, but not very far away. So it's a big change. But yeah, for me personally, it's a bit of a reinvention because I've reinvented my whole job profile here within TAUS, and I'm still enjoying it. So it's actually not that bad.
Yeah. Well, yes, you survived, and you did very well taking charge of lots of other things at TAUS. But indeed, very briefly, and most of you who do attend our webinars on a regular basis already know we did kind of reinvent TAUS. Our events disappeared, but our revenues tripled in just 2 years' time. We're really a data company now, expanded the team, and so we're very busy with our human language projects, adding more data to our library to cover low resource languages. So it's been very interesting in many ways this past year. On a world stage, it's been remarkable, of course, and as we talk about changes in the industry, we'll maybe touch on that here and there. But the discussion last year in the conference was also touching on fears about deglobalization, and we have seen some change in political leaders, especially on the US side, which has maybe softened these fears a little bit, although John will maybe say later, well, yeah, we still see some sort of a new phenomenon of nimble globalization, or what we may call that. But and also a lot of people expected that there would be hyperactivity and mergers and acquisitions in the industry, and that kind of happened. But other than that, it will be interesting. And before you show the new poll, maybe we can ask the panelists indeed, what they felt. At TAUS, I do remember at the end of the virtual conference, John, you were in a panel together with Paula Shannon and Andrew Jocelyn and Joost Setchen, and we had quite a few companies presenting a business case from an imaginary company, like now is the time to do something disruptive and use this crisis very well. And I think we kind of concluded that we were a bit disappointed that it wasn't as revolutionary as we had hoped for. So it will be interesting to now, with all the knowledge we have today, to look back and say, well, what do you think? Was it a reinvention? Was it a reshuffle? Was it a recession? Or was it a redux scenario where we ended up? Yeah. So what do you think, John?
Well, speaking from the report card, which I published recently, which kind of covers the past year, I would actually say only about 10% of the companies would qualify as in this reinvention category. We did have some pullback, some what you call recession. There were websites that dropped languages because they were, cutting budgets. But I was actually surprised that out of the 150 companies that I looked at, and these are large companies, roughly a third added languages. So there's still growth, but I wouldn't call it reinvention. I would call it very steady. Just, they're just finding their, the past year has been for most companies just, let's get through the year, that kind of thing, slow and steady. But there is some innovation, and particularly in machine translation, which I'm sure we'll cover later in this.
Yeah. What do you think, Anna? Was it now looking back, which of the 4 scenarios would you say has come out of this year?
Yeah, I think from my experience, indeed, it was maybe not just one scenario, but I would say it's probably, in our case, it would be reshuffle, if I would call it, because what we saw in case of IKEA, or also connected to languages and localization, where we started to look at it more since we started to implement machine translation and translation management technology. So we really focused on the technology part, which enabled us to actually be more flexible, be more adjustable to this ever-changing situation in the world. But at the same time, I think it's also gave us the possibility to see localization as a more transparent, so we could actually see what is happening behind the scenes. So it's not, and maybe for us who are working closely in that area, it's not something new, but for other departments or other areas, it was always something like a kind of a black box where something is happening. It costs a lot of money, it takes a lot of time, but now that was actually quite eye-opening to understand, okay, this is what it takes actually to make content available in multiple languages. So I think that's what happened. So it's not like something very dramatic or a reinvention, but it is reshuffling the focus and making it, adapting to the situation that was happening.
Yeah. So a reshuffle. And I think, John, for you too, right? Not a real reinvention, but more on a reshuffle would be your probably what came out of your feedback. Yeah. And Eric, what would you say?
I think it depends a lot on the subcomponent of our industry, because some of the pieces like traditional localization was already essentially a virtualized 100% digital distribution model. So there really wasn't a big impact on kind of how translators who are already solo workers in many cases, how they interact with the platforms already virtual. So I would imagine it kind of depends. I think the ones that had to reinvent themselves were the ones for whom there was a physical dependency, like interpreters, for example. I think that segment of our industry had to change dramatically to try to find new ways of delivering services without having been physically there. And not just because the interpreters couldn't go meet their clients, but because the entire system was changing. Like the courts, for example, if you're a court interpreter, now suddenly everybody's, figuring out InfoSec. How do you figure out who has access to it? Everybody's working from home all of a sudden, recording control, lots and lots of changes. That's just a tiny little point in there. It also depends on the vertical. I think certainly, companies are challenged with different kinds of business problems. So travel and leisure, obviously survival mode, like how can you generate any revenue or virtual experiences? Whereas on the goods as opposed to experiences market, the lots of people were buying stuff, and so the supply chain problems that people needed to address of getting stuff to people's houses boomed all of a sudden. So that was a huge upside. But yeah, I'd say the market as a whole contracted a little bit. It contracted a lot in H1 in my first chapter. Chapter 2, it bounded back quite a lot as people were adapting and starting to invest in new and different ways. And I think the general consensus is that there's probably a 1 to 2% decline reduction in the size of the industry. Meanwhile, the weaker players there is a consolidation effort where companies may take an opportunity to pick up some deals in the market, especially for when things are a little soft like this. Investors might feel better about sort of the messaging of a consolidation strategy. And then on the third part, you have, the reshuffling. I do think that a lot of resources had to be moved around internally and between the industry as people are refocusing on different core service types. So that sometimes meant, changing jobs. Sometimes meant changing your marketing strategy. And now I'm just thinking, John, you might have some thoughts about this later on, but just thinking about the fact that suddenly there's a lot more money going after the eyeballs and the clicks and the buys than ever before. So because you don't have that, that spend somewhere else, it's all getting shuffled into kind of a how do I get my customers to buy stuff from us at home, or buy new product, services, streaming. Yeah. So it's interesting. That would be a huge growth, which isn't even on here, where there's a huge growth in attention to the marketing investment that they're making, at least the smart ones.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Good. Well, Annemai, let's maybe the next slide shows what people voted a year ago. Let's see. Oh, this is the outcome of the.
Yeah.
And how was it last year?
Well, I think I need to hide the results to do that, but I have them written down here too. So let me go to the next slide. Yeah. And show you here that indeed 50% was thinking we would end up with a reinvention. The reshuffle was a bit lower, but also very high, 30.5%. And the recession, 11.5%, redux, 8%. So the majority now says it was a reshuffle. We hear it, of course, also from John and Anna, and Eric is a bit more divided over the quadrant. Yeah,
what's
but
the percentage of redux now? Sorry, what's the percentage of reshuffle now?
Reshuffle was 41%.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The reinvention 38%. So they are very close together, and I could watch them here. All the numbers go up, and they were kind of switching the whole time. So eventually a reshuffle won, but they are close together. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Interesting. Nice. Thanks everybody for contributing to this poll. So let's click through and look a little bit at what people expected last year, and then we'll zoom in for a moment with John, Eric, and Anna on some of the topics and themes that really came clearly out of the virtual conference last year. So people discussed contraction or growth, together with this fear for deglobalization. And obviously, as we already mentioned, machine translation is likely to increase a lot. On the negative side, people were afraid that there would be a system crash on the OSPs, for the OSPs. Disintermediation and automation came out as a theme that would threaten position of LSPs. Don't think that happened, but let's see how we look back at that with the panelists in a moment. So the reshuffle, which is the winning scenario today, said we'll have shakeouts and not much of a disruption. E-commerce is booming, as is pharma and life sciences, obviously. We see a reshuffle of content over product, more consolidation driven by mid-sized OSPs. Well, that is all, if you ask me now, spot on, but let's see, let's discuss that. And the recession, continued increased pressure on freelancer rates. We had quite a few freelance translators also participating in the conference last year, so they were the ones who were really very fearful for that. Slowdown in globalization, not so bad, I think. So what was the percentage of recession now, by the way, in the poll today?
11%. So
same.
Yeah,
consistent.
Similar,
yeah. And then the reinvention. Yeah. We had some really big optimists in the audience, and it's interesting that 50% voted for that, and that has come down. So there are a few more people disillusioned about, well, disillusioned. I mean, a reshuffle is not bad either, right? But let's talk about that, and look at let's go on to the next slide. This is a lot of text. That's nice for people to read back later if they want to. For those of you who participated in the conference last year, and I think many of the people in the audience did, you do remember that we had quite a complex approach there with this scenario-based planning. We asked people to kind of label sort of key topics and themes, and then also come back and kind of do a voting, negative or positive, on all of these topics and themes. And so we started mapping this out, and this was the landscape, if you like, the picture of the world economy. So we have these uncertainties on the political level, the recession, of course, the COVID-19, what will that do to the industry? And then you find that back also on the society header, working from home, the virtualization, the digital transformation, agility. Yeah, and then the whole discussion around growth or contraction, recession. So I'd like to ask the panelists now which topic they felt has really played the biggest kind of role, or topics, maybe 2 or 3, 1, 2 or 3. You really want to call out now and say, yeah, that has really taken possession of our lives, of our industry in some shape or form, and how did it? So Anna, maybe you want to pick 1 or 2 of these topics and talk about that briefly.
Yes, indeed, and I think the ones that I would choose are from the society part, and really focusing on digital transformation, agility, working from home, and that I think also representing the brand that is again about life at home, and traditionally, of course, being the company which is relies a lot on the physical goods, and being in a physical store, experiencing the goods, and then making your choice. I think that was definitely a big change for IKEA as a brand to become more digital. And I think digital transformation, yes, that's definitely the key word that we keep on hearing, and working in agile way, changing our ways of working based on that. And now we also, it's not only digital transformation as such, but it is impacting the different areas. So it is in a way business transformation. So it's incorporating digital as a kind of integral part of everything you do. So and of course with the language industry, it's like Eric said, it was already there. So we're trying to also understand how we can learn from it, and what, for example, what does it mean to have a minimum viable product when we talk about translation. So I think that those, I would say, are definitely topics that reflected throughout the year and continue to be developing further.
So did the pandemic accelerate this process at IKEA, this digital transformation process?
Definitely, yeah. As I mentioned, of course, we were on the way to expand e-commerce and to make it a more smooth process for the customers to be able to make their choices on the web and not having to travel to the store. And I think now what has been accelerated, definitely the e-commerce, but also this kind of what we call the total market approach, where we combine the different channels. So it's not only the store on the outskirts of a city, it's also a small city studios that you can go in the middle of Paris, and you can just pop up into the planning studio and maybe plan your kitchen, or plan your wardrobe, or having a pickup point where you can order online and you can pick up your goods in that store. So it is a combination of different approaches, and that I think was really what this COVID situation managed to push for, to trigger even further.
Yeah. Now you mentioned
Definitely.
that IKEA stopped printing and distributing the catalog, the printed catalog. Would that decision also have been taken without the pandemic?
I think, yes, I think it was already on the radar for quite some time, reevaluating the impact that it has. And of course, it's a very strong marketing tool.
Yeah.
And many people actually still miss it. So it was quite a wave of change. And but at the same time, it's of course thinking about the sustainability of that of the printed, because it's quite a big printed production. And what is the impact, and having it in a different form, so still to have this inspirational content, but to have it in a different way, and to maybe develop it in a multilingual way as well, as it was also mentioned, I think, in one of the predictions, where we should probably develop multilingual content instead of focusing on English as a source. So I think that's also some that's, I think, part of reinvention. We're not that there yet, but I think it's some kind of a trend that probably will be growing, as I see.
Yeah, sure. Right, let's move on. We have so much to cover. John, which topics, themes are the most significant for you, looking back now?
Oh gosh, I would say definitely the globalization, deglobalization tension, if you will, has definitely been interesting. We have had a change in leadership here in the U.S., but I would say the tension hasn't gone away. And one area that is, that is really acute is this just-in-time supply model, which was really an outgrowth of the globalization trend. And here in the US with the automotive sector, anyone relying on semiconductor chips will tell you just in time is not working as well as it was supposed to work. So what we're seeing is definitely this idea of planning for disruptions should be baked in more heavily into all plans. Nimbleness, flexibility, bringing, making yourself more self-sufficient. And from a web globalization perspective, there is the element of decentralization. What I've always recommend, you want to balance global consistency with local flexibility. That's going to apply to your hosting of websites, managing user data, because obviously we have China that kind of goes its own way, and now we're seeing Russia exert a lot of pressure on these large internet and tech companies. There is a playbook out there that is still being that other countries are aware of, other governments are aware of. So I don't think this tension is going to go away. So I think companies do need to have a very decentralized structure in place, so that if the landscape changes suddenly, they can adapt to it more quickly.
Yeah. So the topic of learning to be anti-fragile, right? What's the author of the book again? This has become a very important notion. We have to learn to live with crisis. Yeah.
Right.
Become nimble. Yeah. Eric, what do you pick up on here from the themes that came out of the conference last year?
Well, I think this whole thing is a fascinating situation. It's a real once in a lifetime black swan event, but I don't know that I can say that there won't be another one in a few years, just because the world is hyper interdependent and supply chains are global, markets are global. The world really doesn't divide itself very easily into regions as much as it used to, especially with access to the internet. So people who have access to the internet have access to the internet economy and the information economy. That, I think, has very little boundaries stopping globalization. That part, I think, is very, very easy to see increasing. And as such, you look at those market sectors that are the winners in this, and it's technology. I think finance, to some degree, public sector. I mean, these are the big industries where the areas of our industry where I would expect acceleration because of COVID, but also onward, right? As we've gotten a taste of virtualization, as more people are getting connected, I think, and solving things in a digital way, because they had to, a lot of laggards had to suddenly jump into the 21st century. Meanwhile, you have others like travel and leisure and engineering, where the supply chain, manufacturing, anything that involves stuff, that stuff needs to cross physical boundaries. You've got, ships. We saw when the ship blocked the Suez Canal just how maxed out our global, transport system really is. So that I would expect, and I think the goods the goods side, the physical things that need to move around have flattened. And I don't think that they'll go up much more. I think part of the takeaway is companies, just as John said, will start finding sort of nearshore or alternate shore options for them, or in-house even, and look for stability in their supply chain to handle this disruption. There's other reasons why a lot of companies start sort of putting the labor price differentials softening over the years. We're having the cost and risk of global trade for physical stuff again. But when you get back to the intellectual stuff, anything digital, that stuff's going to accelerate. It's going to go faster and faster as walls drop. That's my prediction and also my observation. So I think the shift in the verticals and the shift in the buying behavior, there's permanent changes that have happened because of this that it's going to kind of come back a little bit as we get back into some normalcy. But I think some of it is going to be permanent change.
And 3D printing, has that seen a significant increase? Because that will be the ultimate sort of onshoring, right? You produce your goods at home.
Yeah, there's some fun stuff to watch there, but I don't see it mass produced yet.
We're not there yet. Yeah. Too disruptive. Yeah,
it's on its way.
By the way, to the audience, we can already predict that this webinar is going to run over time because we have so much more to cover. And this time, I would say, if the speakers also don't mind, we'll do let it run over time a bit. Is it okay for you, Anna and John and Eric? Yeah.
Sure.
So that we're not feeling too stressed, because we do have valuable things to share here, and we also know that there's a lot more to come. So thanks also for everybody in the audience who's able to stay a little longer. We're zooming in on the industry economy now, and same question for every one of you. Maybe we'll just start with Anna again. Which of all of these circles there, did you find the most relevant one if you look back now? What really has had an impact on your business in the past year?
Yeah, and here I think if we focus on the language and localization, definitely there was a lot of attention to automation, and so the content and workflows, I would say, were the key topics because the volume of content definitely grew, and of course to translate or to localize it in a traditional way, that actually was not even possible anymore. So the automation, the machine translation, and what it also says here, continuous localization, that has been the key themes. And as I said, we are not there yet. We're really, I would say, we're kind of in the beginning of that journey to understand how we can automate, how we can reuse the content that we produce, because a lot of content is being produced in different areas. IKEA is a big organization. We have franchisor that I'm representing. We have a lot of franchisees. We have our product development organization, which is of course responsible for everything that connects to product information being available in due time. So it's a lot about reducing this time to market. And having information when it's needed for the either internally for the colleagues or for the customers. So I think that has been definitely the focus areas in the industry, and so I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, good. And John, what do you think really stands out now that you look back on this year?
Well, yeah, I would say, gosh, one thing that I'm finding really interesting is there's so many levels to this industry. And what I've seen over the past year are so many small to medium-sized companies that have entered this industry, if you will, because they have gone all in on e-commerce by necessity in many cases. So they're now on Shopify or they're doing WooCommerce, and they're starting to ask questions about how do I expand globally. And so it's for me personally, it's a challenge because, and it's an exciting challenge because these are people who are new to this field. So it's a great thing for the industry. I believe it's growing, and it's kind of, we're in the early stages of it, and obviously small to medium-sized companies aren't doing a million words, so it's not going to move the needle for a lot of large providers, but it's definitely an exciting time to be in this field. So there is language growth happening, even if it's not happening with the large brands. And I mentioned the report card, and the average number of languages is 33, and this is kind of the large global brands, and that stayed steady over the past year, which is the first year it did not go up. So even though there were websites like FedEx and Lego and Tesla and Netflix, those companies all added languages on their websites over the past year, the net overall did not go up. So that's relatively static at this high level. But the small to medium-sized companies that I don't cover in the report card, there is a lot of activity. They might go from 1 language to 3 languages, but that is significant for them, and it's something that is great for the industry.
Yeah. Did IKEA add more languages in the past year, Anna?
Yeah, I think there might be a couple added because of our expansion to the new countries, and also eventually new languages. So I think, yes, we've definitely added, and I think for us, this kind of presence, being kind of a global company present in different markets has been historically there. So I think in that sense, we take it as a kind of a democratic approach that we need to add languages independently if it's a big country, big market, or it is a small country and in a way a small language that is spoken by not so many people. But I think where we are at is actually looking at the different e-commerce platforms like, I don't know, like Amazon, for example, where they offer a different experience online, where I'm sitting in the Netherlands, I'm Russian, I can actually choose Russian as my language, and I can shop while still being in the Netherlands, but then in my mother tongue. So is it an idea then to, and I think we are doing it to a certain extent right now. So in the Netherlands, for example, you can shop both in English and in Dutch, and in a couple of other countries. But I think there is still a way to go to actually offer that multi-language experience, especially I think in certain markets, it would help a lot to reach the many people, as we say at IKEA, where we have our mission to reach the many.
Yeah, exactly. Eric, what's your view on the industry economy and what sort of has really occupied our brains in the past year?
Sure. Well, first off, I think it's an exciting industry to be in because it's growing. There's a lot of industries that aren't growing this fast. I think high single digits in the industry as a whole is a pretty good performance. So even if you don't do a lot, you're likely to be growing, and that creates a lot of opportunity and interest in investment by outside parties for either developing new technologies or developing, that kind of drives the M&A stuff as well, trying to create value by adding different entities together. But I think I'm fascinated by the fragmentation really of how the industry has evolved, and it really isn't just one industry anymore. The subsections are really performing as independent sort of domains, and so you really can't look at the whole thing. I can't look at the whole thing and predict the same things. It depends on where you are inside the industry. Now, certain things already, probably remote working, like I wouldn't want to own a lot of commercial real estate right now. I see a lot of companies never going back to full on-staff kind of model. There's also an evolution of professionalism in a work from home model and how you monitor and manage remote workers. I think that's all the industries that kind of pertain to that, both in terms of from ergonomics to having space that is appealing to being able to focus, being able to monitor that things are being done. Just being in the office doesn't mean you're getting things done, from the standpoint of your world. But in terms of regionalization, I do predict regionalization will only impact areas where there are strategic vulnerabilities. There's a benefit to kind of bringing something closer to where you can control what's happening. I think that there's still the opposite force, which is find the just-in-time model, the Kaizen guys, the Six Sigma approach is all very like eliminate waste, eliminate variation, keep it simple, keep it fast, keep it efficient. That force will still be there, but I'll add another one. This is the one that I think is merging from my standpoint, is kind of the balance between kind of a large language set versus small language set is the intense competition for customer experience. So the companies who focus on customer experience are the winners in the market. You look at their whole life cycle of their relationship with their customers, it's a big deal, right? It's big business to get your customer experience right. So if you're looking at investing a finite amount of money, do you want to focus on your customers in a narrower market set and do really well with those? Or do you want to skate across a very large language set and try to touch a little bit for everybody? And the thing is, it's really tough because, different markets use products in different ways. I was just, struck by how printers in Kazakhstan, for example, are being used, personal printers are being used as essentially business printers, and it's largely, the oil and gas industry, and they're usually, but they're intensively using these things in ways that they weren't designed for. And yet there's other cases in which, we're localizing a bunch of stuff because we think we want equal treatment for all languages, but the individual ROI for each of those regions investments might be extraordinarily different. So I predict that the winners in the market will be focused on CX, focused on sort of the strategy for building and retaining their customers in particular markets, and there's a different strategy for each market, and that kind of leads to a regionalization concept, right? Because that individual region might be able to intensively focus on engaging their customers in a way that's different than, say, another region might look at it, and their supply chains might need to diversify as well in order to meet that requirement.
Yeah, thank you. Let's move on. Let's take a look at the technology. That was obviously a big discussion in our conference last year, because the technology was in many ways already there, but we thought that this crisis would accelerate adoption and deployment of AI in particular and machine translation. Now, how do we look at that with all the knowledge that we have today? And let's just go the same sequence there, Anna, if you want to go first.
Yeah, I think definitely there was an acceleration for us, as I already mentioned, that the implementation of so the growth of volume and the need for more immediate reaction and for immediate communication during the time of the pandemic, especially. It also triggered that we basically probably cannot do without machine translation any longer, and of course we need to understand where where it makes sense to implement it. So I think that's this automation was definitely the key factor, and when it comes to process automation, I think that's an interesting one where we saw that yes, it's maybe not so difficult to make machine translation available. However, when you talk about quality, when you think about the needed level of quality and how to reach it, then definitely that's where there are humans in the loop. That's where you still need to manage that process, and how to automate that process. That's, I think, something that is still. It is still a challenge, I think. So that's where we're now, I would say, struggling with and trying to find the best solution, and how, for example, a TMS, translation management, can support. But it's not only that. It's of course having this connectivity, or as it says here, interoperability. I think it's still, I still remember it from last year, that it was something that would allow you to be more flexible in this space where there are so many tools, there are so many content management systems and different sources where information is coming from. So definitely, I think the process automation, reuse of data, that is something that is would be developing further, even with even a more focused way.
Good. John, technology, did it have a big impact in the past year, more than before?
Well, I feel like we always talk about machine translation, and I've been bullish on it from pretty much the get-go. But one thing I often have to remind myself is that as much as technology enables, it can also hinder, meaning, for a lot of big companies, they can't move any faster than their technology will allow them to move. So if they have a large legacy CMS and they can't integrate machine translation easily into it, they're just not doing it. And so there's a lot of companies I talk to that see it internally, they want to do it, but they're still a year to two out. That said, from a technology perspective, there's some exciting things happening. And you've probably heard these buzzwords, serverless or headless CMS. And I've been involved with a few migrations, and I think it's going to present some really nice opportunities for machine translation integration, because if you embrace this serverless model or headless model, it becomes much more easy to plug and play different, it becomes an API-based data model.
You're basically decoupling your user interface from the CMS side, right?
And it's a more modular view of managing content, and it has complexity as well. It's not a one size fit all, but it will open windows, I think, in many organizations to test machine translation more readily, and particularly user-facing machine translation, which I am hugely bullish on, and I think is the most interesting area. And because we're users around the world, and now we have Apple Translate that is starting to really be integrated across a lot of their apps. Users are becoming more and more comfortable with machine translation, and that is undisputable, whether, warts and all. I know it's not perfect. So what if we look a few years out, are users going to go to your website and say, well, why can't I self-translate this? They can, obviously, through Chrome, but and Edge with Microsoft, and I'm sure Safari as well. So they're going to be able to do that through the web client. But what are you as a company going to do to provide even a better experience, a better quality of translation, leveraging machine translation tools? And not only that, you would own that experience, and you would learn. What I think would be most valuable is you would create a demand-driven translation workflow. So you would learn what content in what languages users want on your website, and that could drive your professional translation workflow. And there are companies doing that right now, but not enough. But I think that when we talk innovation, I think that is one of the more exciting areas for me.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I saw you nodding, Eric. You would totally agree with John on the complexity and the sort of the hesitance from customers to implement all this great technology right away. What would you say?
Yeah, I agree with John on almost everything he says. So it's my nodding to his talking is just an automatic response. But anyway, more specifically, what I'm thinking with regards to technology is that technology is deployed when it's painful enough not having it, or if there's a sustained competitive advantage that you can get from it. And if you look at sort of MT as a competitive advantage, you can have, with the same amount of spend, you can have more people have good enough, all that whole argument, that still stays the same. And as MT improves, and it's going to come up and level off, but there's still going to be some limits to that in terms of and the use of humans in the loop. I think the demand for human translators is going to keep going up. I mean, I think it's still more and more and more as our economy, as our digital economy and our exchange of ideas goes more. And I'll mention very briefly from the AI space, because it's something that I'm digging into a lot more these days. And I think that the AI, of course, is a vast array of different kinds of capabilities, whether it's transcribing this, presentation. Why doesn't GoToMeeting have a transcription that's happening right away, and that people who may not speak English can't follow along and maybe translate it? I mean, there's other technologies that are out there. So for GoToMeeting to compete with in the future, or GoToWebinar, sorry, they will now have to develop that capability. Now there's things like figuring out how to detect dialects, how to disambiguate background noise, how to not introduce bias into the way that these things are working. That would cause consumers to be distressed or to disempower certain demographics. I mean, all these are really, really important. So now we have to collect a bunch of data and collect a bunch of solutions to things, whether it's automating the buying experience at a fast food chain, or whether it's helping to identify certain types of content for classification automatically in the market in different languages. So there's lots and lots of demand for this, and it's only going to accelerate. And the multidimensional element of that acceleration is going to be, I think, a bigger and bigger part of the technology conversation as we move into the third decade of the 20th century. With regards to automation, automation is also a vast word, and you can automate. I think it's really easy to automate task distribution. It's hard to get the right task to the right person at the right time and get all the information that they need to do the correct job. That's where the complexity comes in, and it gets very hard. So you have to really have discipline across the whole process that you're automating to control the input criteria, so that you're not wildly diverging as the automation needs to kind of adapt to infinite number of human types of inputs, which are obviously the most chaotic thing of all. The human produced stuff is the messy stuff. That's the part that is the hardest. And as we kind of evolve as an industry, being able to handle that relationship with, again, customers and the company, and how do you, the whole personalization, privacy, these are all things that are going to make this industry. It's going to be the biggest growth opportunity in the industry, I think, is the introduction of these transmodal communication styles and using smart systems more effectively in the industry.
Yeah, great. Thanks for all these thoughts from all of you. This is really great, and we'd like to take maybe 15 minutes more of your time now, so we indeed go a bit over the hour by looking forward a bit more. So let's forget about this crisis year and see, and some of you touched on that already in the answers that you just gave. But for those of you who read the report that we published after the virtual conference last year, remember maybe the opening pages there, we said never waste a good crisis. And what we really meant was, there was some reference here, because already in 2017, TAUS published a report called Nunc est Tempus. Now is the time to reinvent your translation business. And well, in your answers, John and Eric and Anna, you just kind of illustrated why it's not so easy as people at TAUS sometimes might think. It's the technology's there, use it, implement it, but then you have all this complexity with your legacy CMS systems, and you haven't figured out how to do this headless kind of API use and decoupling your systems and integrating MT very quickly. So we were a little disappointed, and we said, well, now this crisis will be the catalyst. Now it will happen. And we just sort of evaluated where we stand today, and it seems like, yeah, we're making progress, but are we there yet? Some of the themes that we called out in the opening pages of the report were two themes in particular, an economic one and a sociological one, if you like. The economic one was the advocacy for the zero or near zero marginal cost model. Can we finally now move away from the cost per word business model to you invest in an infrastructure that translates for you. It becomes a software as a service model. So that's one aspect that we'd like you to think about and maybe reflect on very briefly. Are companies moving this direction? And the sociological one we touched on already, like the language expansion. We're still in many ways thinking in the last century with the last century mentality of adding a language means is a decision taken with an export mentality, like it's a business argument, like we can generate more revenue from that particular language, that locale, that market. But now we live in the age of wokeness. Language can never be a reason to discriminate users. You have to have the maximum language coverage, and big tech companies are competing for language coverage with their empty infrastructures. But are enterprises following this example? Is there some movement there? Is there some change that you see in your daily work environment in that regard? That's already been touched on. It was sort of a rather static, John said, from his report card, but nevertheless, maybe a quick sort of round of reflections on those two themes. The new zero marginal cost model, having an infrastructure managing your translation for you, moving away from the word rate, the word-based pricing model, and the second one, the language coverage and thinking for the users from the user's perspective. Anna, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the economic or the cost perspective is indeed a very interesting topic that has been, I think, now discussed more and more in the industry, but also in the company. Maybe, yeah, there is a start of this reevaluation of thinking about costs. And as I mentioned, now we started to implement machine translation, not only like for user-generated content, but for example, we work a lot with e-learning content, and we implement machine translation, but we are not comfortable in just pushing it out raw as it is. So post-editing, the rates for post-editing, what we see is actually there is not such a big difference between the human translation rate and the post-editing rate. So trying to also understand how we can benefit, and also with the time to market as well. We don't really yet see the big difference. So that's where I think the struggles are at the moment, and where I think at the moment we're still thinking of this project-based. So we treat translation as a project, and it's sometimes, if you have these big volumes, as I was talking about, I think it's just not possible to have that concept of a project. So you take it as a volume, as a service. And I know that in one of the events or of the conferences, they also mentioned to kind of to deconstruct a project, or to deconstruct that volume, take it piece by piece, and then that helps you to actually reach the time to market. So I think it's an interesting approach, but then at the same time, I'm still thinking about all this management that it still requires. If we have human in the loop, if we have this assigning of tasks. So now I think our engineering team is referring to a project management less approach, so where you actually it's not a threat indeed for the translators, because translators will be there. Maybe their role will change a bit in the future, but it is more I think a threat in a way to the project managers probably. But I'm still trying to see how exactly that would work with this process automation, and eventually reflecting on the costs as well. Is it some kind of a retainer? Is it that you pay for a certain volume that you commit to, and then that saves you also from a lot of administration and management. So I think that's definitely a way forward to probably move away from the traditional thinking. Yep. Cost per word, cost per hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, great. John, any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, number one, that is a perennial question, isn't it? I would say the clients, they want subscription models. I mean, that is the look at Amazon Web Services. Look at how we purchase software. Everything is subscription based. Adobe, personally, everything I buy is a subscription. We like predictability. We like that. So I think the sooner that vendors can start to adapt to the demand, the better. Now, of course, how does that works really well with machine translation as a service. It works less well with human beings doing translating.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to emphasize, though, is I think as machine translation develops and expands, there's going to be more of a need for original content creation at the local level, and we're seeing that. I mean, that is some of the best content, frankly. I always say the best local content is not translated at all. It's created close to the user. It's very timely. It's keyword rich in terms of responding to the latest keywords. It performs really well from an SEO perspective. So that is human-centric content creation, whether it's translated or not. So yeah, I would say yes, subscription-based models are absolutely going to happen. And secondly, the need for languages. Yeah, I mean, it's something that drives me personally, and it has from the beginning. How do we encourage companies to add more languages? And I kind of try to nudge them with the report card, because 33 sounds like a lot to many companies, but it's not a lot. It's really not. And many of these companies that I cover, I often say they're punching below their weight. They're actually under translating. They're not supporting languages that they should, because they're already selling to people within these markets. So they're actually not well serving them at all. And these are major brands that we all know. And so one visual I think I created last year was this chart, and it showed, that average of 33 languages, and that's the leading global brands. And then most SMEs, small to medium sized companies, are between 1 to 5 languages. So it's lower down. And then on the other side, you've got Google Translate at 111 plus languages. So there's this gap. So it's clear, it's obvious machine translation is going to play an essential role to helping companies, get up to that 100 plus language threshold.
Right. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Thanks. Eric, any additional insights on this?
Well, I'm going to rapid fire a bunch of stuff. One, I think eliminating as much project management is good for everybody. I think it's essentially manual hand cranking of moving things around. So, but that isn't bad for project managers, because theoretically they can get more business done with one project manager, which theoretically makes those project managers more valuable. They're not sitting there doing menial jobs. They're doing big strategic and relationship stuff, and I think that's the future. Second, tying into something that John said, zero incremental cost really needs automation, because you can't have a human in the loop and have it be zero incremental cost, because humans are really expensive, and they anywhere that you have to add a human into the loop, it adds a lot of significant cost. Which brings us to kind of hybrid models, which I'd love to see more of, which is sort of the idea, and I've seen this a few times, but it's a model where, say, either MT is doing preliminary translation, or you have a translator who's kind of retained for a certain amount, a predictable demand, and you work on prioritization to just crank through the top items, like the most viewed pages or the most the most often searched for terms, and then they just kind of work on that creates their backlog, and they just kind of work through that at a predictable rate. That creates predictability. It is a constant improvement. If there's escalations because a client is confused or causes problems, that bumps it up the list. But I think that kind of technology of doing that kind of prioritization of the valuable human resources would be a company I would invest in. Like, I would want to know, how can you best coordinate and prioritize that stuff? I think there's other things like ROI-based pricing, which I think is super intriguing. Obviously, it shifts the risk around a lot. So, I mean, our industry is very time and materials heavy, but if you look at it as a co-investor into global growth, like a partner can kind of cooperate in helping to invest in these new markets, and then gets a bigger share of the returns from it being done really well. But that kind of breaks the buyer-vendor divide, and there's a lot of trust required. So it almost needs to be like a different way of thinking about this to make that work. You know, you need financer, you need like the expert in the locale and say this one needs to be done by hand. This cluster of stuff, this market's going to be fine with being just raw MT. And then you need, of course, the technology and the maybe some type of LSP function in there. But I would see that as a truly innovative model. And it's been tough to sort of see how that can, I mean, the entities in our market right now aren't well suited to solve those problems together very well. I think there's some potential in close partnerships where there's sort of, or in-house teams where they can explore that under one roof type of thing. But I would love, I predict that will happen more, and I think it would be valuable. I'd love to see kind of ROI-based or investment-based pricing on some of this stuff. And interestingly enough, just as a closing thought, that kind of goes back to the origins of translation, right? Because translators in many markets own the translation technically. So in a way, it's kind of like putting the ownership of that back into the hands of the person who's creating the value. But it also creates risk, because if they're translating something that doesn't perform, who's to blame? Where do you lose? So, you know, it needs a lot of thought about what you're trying to achieve with the translations, how they're going to be monetized, and what your overall goals are, which gets back to the CX thing. If you're relentlessly focused on the customer, a lot of stuff will organize itself. If you're relentlessly organized around unit rates per word, then you're just going to produce a lot more words cheaply, but it doesn't necessarily improve customer experience. Like you need to really always be, that's what we're going for. What tools do we have to make that the best possible thing, so that customer, again, I'm not thinking about the big players as the customers. We're all partners here, whether you're buyers or vendors. We're on the same team. We're trying to help find that and make that customer happy is what we're trying to do. So.
Great thoughts. Thank you so much. We're getting to the last question, and maybe short answers because we're already 10 minutes over time. And the last question is a bit selfish here, because for TAUS, because we touched on the complexity of integrating all this AI and MT technology in your legacy systems, and that would be sort of slowing us down. But there are other things there, and it's touched on already in some of your reflections earlier. But you see that machine translation is becoming kind of a commodity market. It's very cheap. You just pay. If you use some of the big MT systems, you pay for the use of the API as subscription, indeed, and that's very low. But to make it really work well for you, you need to invest in data. You need to invest in customization, and that cost is pretty high. And this is an area where TAUS is investing as the language data network quite heavily with the data marketplace that we have partly released, and there are more features coming with a data pipeline and automated workflow for cleaning, clustering, anonymization. And maybe Eric, you've kind of already given some hints there, but what we're interested in getting your expert advice on from all three of you is, and what more can we do to lower that threshold, to help beyond sort of the big tech companies who are indeed investing heavily in language coverage and quality of their MT systems, to let enterprises follow, to let industry follow, the OSPs, the global companies, smaller companies, to use machine translation, customized machine translation, and help them to onboard with this great technology and get more language coverage and get more users to be delighted about finding all the content in their own languages. But the cost is so high today to do that all properly. So maybe the ROI model that you mentioned, Eric, but maybe there are other ideas. What do you think? What is your advice to TAUS to make this more accessible, the future?
Well, the first is that MT is only the tip of the iceberg, and getting, I mean, that's data that helps us to train essentially an artificial translator to do effective translation. The demand for it is huge. I mean, I think that there's in my dream world, we'll have routinely people speaking 200 languages being able to participate in the global market. And as their median income goes up, and they are, I mean, the world is getting richer, safer, and more prosperous every year, which is a weird thing because we worry about it so much more, but it is. So there's more and more people out there who are willing to buy, sell, trade, wanting to access information. So I think what the part of the problem is not understanding these markets, not understanding what's going on right now. That I think maybe investing in understanding what the opportunity really is there might help generate demand, because you need to say you should translate into Zulu, but somebody might say, who speaks Zulu that I need to talk to, and don't they speak French or English or Dutch or something also? And then I would say, well, these guys are there's 8 million people who are like primarily Zulu buyers, and here's your buying potential, and here's what you could do with this information to try to make that more interesting. So I think focusing on the longer tier languages, I'd love to see more Native American languages kind of understood. I think Guarani was one that Facebook was famously translated into Guarani, and it's 8 million people speak Guarani, right? And half of them are monolingual. So that's 4 million people who now have access to something, a platform that they wouldn't otherwise have. Why? Because somebody said, where are the monolingual buyers out there that we can access? Now, obviously, the platform leaders, Google and the FANG Plus guys, they're obviously in a good position to try to drive that long tail conversation, as I imagine with government organizations and public policy, relief, NGOs, things like that. I think finding a way of bridging the capital to the labor, and those are, facilitating that would be my strategy for how to accelerate that market.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, John. Any advice for TAUS on how we can lower the thresholds for all the great technology and data to be used?
Yeah, I mean, just a few thoughts. Just the case studies that you already do, I think, are valuable. And because this is challenging stuff for a lot, even companies that you think already get it, the people that do get it within those organizations have to do a lot of selling to get the business case, to justify the business case. It is, like I said, there were a few companies over the past year. These are a few in the top 25 of the report card that dropped languages. So people in those organizations actually lost the business case argument for what languages that we consider essential already, that were already considered essential within these companies. So it is a never-ending battle. But I think there's going to be opportunity for the small and medium-sized companies to more easily embrace MT. They're definitely more open to it. And as I mentioned, this serverless API-based model is going to present a lot of opportunities for integration and onboarding. So to whatever extent you can make that more seamless. So if somebody's hosted on WordPress, for example, and they're going headless, because there's now headless implementations of wordless now. So how can you integrate? I'm thinking of another provider, Contentful, which is a content provider, and they have integrations now, I think, with SmartLing, and I think there's another company that has basically plugins onto that platform. So there's going to be a lot more opportunities, and ultimately the more seamless it can be, the better. And I do think we're getting close, I hope, and maybe this is wishful thinking, of this dam breaking. I feel like the dam is building. Like, all of us in this virtual room, we get it, we see it, we see how revolutionary this is going to be when companies can flip a switch basically and go from 10 languages to 50 or more. It's going to be amazing, and suddenly everyone's going to have to do it. Everyone is so focused on their competitors, and if their competitors don't do it, they don't do it. But I feel like we're very, very, very close to this inflection point. And TAUS has a huge role to play in that. So yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Anna, you got the final word. What can we do for you? You need to see the post-editing rates really coming down, more transparency maybe, or let me not speak for you. What is it that you need?
Yeah, I think yeah, I agree with Eric and John, and what I can add probably is sometimes maybe there is a need to actually go back to basics and to explain to the companies about the language, and that is, yeah, it's the main means of communication, and especially if we talk about this year, this pandemic year, and the situation where we're in, the access to, it's about accessibility to information. So if you have, I don't know, if you have a news channel and it's not in a language that you don't understand, how do you get updated on what's happening? I don't know. If you need to get vaccinated, how do you know about it? So it's really down to this essential information that needs to be available, and with the volumes that the companies are handling, it's it's impossible to get through it without having collecting the data and having that access. So I think that's it sounds very evident, very basic, but maybe sometimes it's just to kind of have that conversation with the companies. And for us, I think our partner for machine translation is, I think, in a partner with TAUS. So I think that there is already some kind of cooperation happening. And but again, yeah, the pricing model, that's something that we could see how we can improve it and what the future would bring. That would be definitely interesting for us to know.
Good. Thank you. Thank you all. Anna-Maja, I think it's that, we probably have questions, but do we have questions, or?
I actually think that a lot of people were so deep into the conversation that they forgot to ask any questions. So on another note, we were talking about Corona and about vaccinations, and I have my first appointment today. So you are welcome to continue the conversation, but I have to leave.
You get your shot. Yeah, you get your shot. Yeah. No, we're going to close. I'd like to thank you all very, very much for your flexibility, also for spending more time. I think it was really very engaging, very interesting. If there are questions from the audience, we will address them, but in writing after the webinar. Recording will be shared, obviously, and let's continue that conversation, perhaps in person next year.
Yeah, excellent.
At the March conference in San Jose.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.